What I quickly realized, quite frankly, is that the depth and breadth of what needs to get done on delivering on a zero emissions fleet is well beyond the traditional just buying the buses and putting them in service. So we created a program management office, and then we took a look at all the different disciplines that were needed. We said, okay, let's all come together and develop these work streams so that how can we move our organization along so we're all marching in the same tune as we get to 2040.
This is Transit Unplugged. I'm Paul Comfort. Good to be with you on another edition of the world's leading transit executive podcast, Transit Unplugged. News and views this week. Our newsmaker interview is with Craig Cipriano, the former chief operating officer of the New York City MTA. He's going to talk to us about how he spent his career putting people first. Then on the leadership portion of the podcast today, I'll be speaking from my book, Full Throttle, on the chapter I wrote, Putting People First. But first, very interesting news from someone who has continually put people first in his career and his trains, and that is Andy Byford. The former New York City Transit boss, known as Train Daddy, has returned to the United States, and he's going to go work for Amtrak. Byford will start his job on April 10th as Senior Vice President for Amtrak's high-speed rail program, according to an email announcing his hiring. The memo says he'll be based in Washington, D.C., and will ensure operational strategy alignment between the new HSR, or high-speed rail programs, and our current network. Byford's new gig, which was first reported by Streetsblog, comes 6 months after he resigned as London's Commissioner of Transport. Amtrak's hiring of Byford comes as the National Railroad is receiving $22 billion in new investment from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Byford joined the MTA in New York City in 2018 after a multi-year decline in the reliability of New York City's subway service. The United Kingdom native had previously run transit systems in Toronto and New South Wales, Australia. It's when he was in Toronto that I got to know him. At the same time, I was CEO of the MTA in Baltimore. He was our first two-time guest on the Transit Unplugged podcast, one time when he was in the Toronto role, and then another time when he had just gotten into London for his job, and he was talking to me from his apartment overlooking the River Thames. But if you want to hear those podcasts, I encourage you to go back and take a listen. A great guy who really has planned out his career. And I talk about that some in previous podcasts. And so very happy for him to kind of come back and take over this responsibility in a national role here in the United States. So for decades, politicians and think tanks have been trying to get high-speed train network to link the country's major metropolitan areas. When I arrived in Baltimore in 2015, there was a study going on about high-speed rail between Baltimore and Washington. There's a group working on it. They'd received $27 million through the federal government. It's going to follow the Japanese technology of the high-speed rail, which is maglev. Our governor, Larry Hogan, and the Secretary of Transportation went to Japan to test it out. They came back very impressed. Now it is, I think, 7 years later, and it's still being studied. At the time, Vice President Joe Biden and President Barack Obama had announced a sweeping strategic plan for high-speed rail investment, followed by over $50 billion proposed dollars in funding. But 15 years later, we still don't have high-speed rail in the country. There are higher speed rail, right? So the MARC trains that I ran, which is commuter rail from Western Maryland and Baltimore into Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, at the time, I believe, were the fastest running trains in America at 132 miles per hour. They still have the Boston to D.C. Acela run. It's the only Amtrak corridor that's close to be considered high-speed rail, but again, it's higher speed rail. When its new rolling stock hits later this year, they're saying the trains can go up to 160 miles per hour, which I believe will be probably the fastest trains in America. But Andy Byford's good at turning things around, and although his work at the MTA was cut short, Byford was credited for his focus on improving frequency and service, as well as infrastructure proposals to modernize the system end to end. You may recall that by the time he exited the New York City MTA, on-time arrivals had improved from 58% when he got there to 80% when he left. He was putting his pencil to the paper and focusing on improving the performance. And I remember he talked to me about it and said, that's the way to bring people back, right? You build an amazing upgraded system and it'll help people want to ride when it gets them there on time. And while Andy Byford's never focused specifically on high-speed rail, his recent stint at the Transport for London Commissioner may prove instructive. You'll recall that there he oversaw the completion of the long-delayed Elizabeth line, part of a high-frequency commuter rail system that could serve as a good model for Amtrak's regional connections. Still, Byford will have his work cut out for him. President Biden's vowed to build the safest, cleanest, and fastest rail system in the world, but high-speed rail wasn't necessarily made a funding priority in the recent federal infrastructure bill, and the handful of high-speed rail projects underway elsewhere in the country, as I mentioned, are still struggling. The one in California is currently under construction in the state's Central Valley, but it's burdened with cost increases and people that are opposed to it, trying to derail the project. But our train daddy wanted to come back to the United States, and he said in a text message he sent to the New York Times, "I'm excited and humbled to be joining such an American icon," speaking of Amtrak. Quote, "I had a number of job offers, but Amtrak and high-speed rail is where I want to be." And I think all of us here in the United States are thrilled that he's back here and wants to work in this area. I think we've got the best chance in a long time of getting operational high-speed rail coming to the United States with him helming the efforts. That's it for the headline news for today. Now stay tuned for our interview with Craig Cipriano, the former COO of New York City MTA, who worked with Andy while he was there and talks about him on today's interview. I'm Paul Comfort with my special guest, Craig Cipriano. Craig served as president of New York City's MTA bus company, leading the nation's largest bus transit agency through the pandemic and setting its strategy to a zero-emissions fleet by 2040. He also served as interim president of New York City Transit, leading 50,000 employees at the largest transportation agency in North America with an operating budget of $13 billion. Holy moly, Craig, that's something.
That is.
And now, of course, you've retired, like a lot of us have, and are in the private sector, and you're working with STV, one of the big consulting firms, engineering consulting firms. Great to have you with us today to talk about, I think, what is one of the hottest topics right now is zero-emission buses. And, you know, the battery electric buses are leading the charge. Hydrogen is coming up fast from behind, tried to jump up in there. But you've had quite a long history working in that arena, haven't you? Leading this. How many buses, by the way, did you have there?
So we had just shy of 6,000 buses across 28 locations in New York City.
Wow. And you were leading the charge to move toward electrification, right?
Yeah. So when I came to the head of the bus company there, we had made a commitment back in 2018 to 2040, zero emission fleet. And, we had some pilot programs going on and we had some work underway. But, what I quickly realized, quite frankly, is that, the depth and breadth of what needs to get done on delivering on a zero emissions fleet is well beyond the traditional, just buying the buses and putting them in service. So, what we did is we took a step back there at the time and we created a more comprehensive program management structure. So, we created a program management office and then we took a look at all the different disciplines that were needed. We went to capital planning. We went to operations planning. We went to the operating folks. Of course, we went to the power folks and the facility folks, the vehicle folks. So we put together this structure and we said, okay, let's all come together and develop these work streams so that how can we move our organization along so we're all marching in the same tune as we get to 2040? Because, we're really recognized there, especially in a large organization such as New York City Transit, it really comes down to a concerted change management approach. And that's how we went about doing it.
That's good. Yeah, I think a lot of folks who haven't worked in large agencies may not realize how siloed they are. I know that I was taken back by how siloed the agency that I led in Baltimore was, where, not only, as you mentioned, is there silos between the different modes, right? So in Baltimore, there's a whole silo for the subway system with their own safety people, their own operations control center, their own management, their own and then the same thing with the light rail system, and then the same thing with the bus system, and the same thing with the paratransit, the same thing with commuter rail. They've got their own operation. They're all off on their own and never the twain shall meet. Then you get inside of bus and you've got very similar things happening, don't you, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone sort of marches to their own tune, right?
Yes, that's right.
We bring some folks together in a meeting and, start to sort of break down the silos. But, I think in regards to, what you discussed in the zero emission space, it comes down to everyone coming together with that first master plan or transition plan, whatever you want to call it, right? The big picture, holistic transition plan that takes a look at, your environmental impacts, your carbon impacts, your resiliency efforts, takes a look at your technical challenges, such as the vehicles, the power, the infrastructure, and your funding. And then also brings some enablers together. A big piece of this, like I said, is the change management or the workforce development that needs to go on, the training. So, today agencies will have diesel mechanics, right? Tomorrow they're going to be electrical maintainers. Your electrical maintainers on your facilities might become electrical engineers in the future, right? Not many bus operations have a power control center like a rail operation, but if you're relying on the power grid, a power control center, is integral to making sure that you have that service. What I go back to is my own experience. After Superstorm Sandy, much of the subway system in New York City was down, right? Especially Lower Manhattan. We were only able to provide some public transportation options because, our buses at the time ran on diesel fuel. So we were able to put together these bus bridges and connect people, and it brought back a sense of normalcy to the city. But if the bus system relies on that same power grid as the subway or the rail system, then you have an issue. So, the redundancy and the resiliency built into the program is so integral.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's an important lesson. I've heard other CEOs, at least one in particular, have a very long conversation with me about lessons learned from Hurricane Sandy, and that if the grid went down, his buses, if they were all electric, may not be able to, serve as getting people out, evacuation. And so he was interested in looking into hydrogen and other zero emission fuels as well. So I think that, like you said, taking that holistic view is important. Even in an agency, Craig, talk to me a little bit about this, if you would. I found at the agency I served at and at others I've worked with, that there's a big division between the engineering department and operations. Talk to us about that.
Oh, sure. So I think that's really an age-old challenge for public transit agencies, across the country. It's the sort of the split or the tension between capital delivery and operations, right? So I've seen that, over my 30-year career in New York City Transit, where whether it be a new bus depot or whether it be a new vehicles, like you said, for some reason, there's not enough collaboration on the front end, right, to provide the ultimate owner on the back end, namely the operating folks, the product that they're expecting or that meets their needs, right? So I think when it comes to the zero emission space, it's more critical than ever that collaboration happens, because quite frankly, when I look at this, it really is a transformation for the operation, in this case, the bus operation, right? You got to take a look at your business processes and see where you might need to optimize them. Today, for instance, bus comes in the fuel line, you're going to fuel it up, you're going to check the fluids, you're going to tap the tires, take a look at any kind of operated vehicle conditions and put it to bed for the night, and then get ready to use it for 300 miles or so the next day. Now with zero emission bus, especially in this juncture, really before the full maturity of hydrogen fuel cells or that next technology, when you look at battery electric buses, it's a whole different scenario, right? You need to know when you're going to be charging that. If you're looking to charge it all overnight, that's that much more power requirements that you need for the facility. If you're looking to do a mix of day and nighttime charges, then you got to optimize the demand charges that you're going to hit during the day when the power utility has peak demand. So again, it really is a big change for the operation. And that's why when I was at New York City Transit, personally, this was what I pushed for, was having that program management structure reside in the bus department, reside in the operations, and then reaching back out to the capital delivery folks, the capital planning folks, the operations planning, and everybody else. But having the ownership there, because ultimately, the accountability is going to reside on the bus department side to provide the service. Again, you could look at different models, right? But that's the one that I operated under.
Well, it's funny. I ended up doing the same thing at MTA Baltimore. John Duncan, the chief operating officer, and I made a decision that we were going to let the bus division lead the effort because they had the end, responsibilities. And so, otherwise they could complain, well, I didn't have enough input into the bus being put together, the specs and all, so you can't expect me to be held accountable for operating it effectively. So we ended up moving it there and let engineering assist them, but the buck stopped with them. So it's interesting. Yeah, I'm a strong believer in pushing it as close to the front line as possible. I've always have been. I know you believe that too, Craig. You've had quite a career in transportation. I mean, you started as a mechanical engineering intern, and over 33 years and ended up as head of the nation's largest transit company. Quite an ascent. Where would you say was a pivotal moment? Let's switch now from day-to-day operations. I'm interested in your career story for a few minutes.
Sure.
About your career that made that journey a reality.
Sure. Back in 1989, I came to transit as a mechanical engineer intern in the subways department. A few years later, I got into a management training program that the MTA was sponsoring, and I moved over to the bus side. And then, I was really in middle management for the most of my career from then till about the early 2000s, working in a variety of bus depots throughout New York City. And again, I came to a sort of a point in my career where, at that time, there was sort of an unwritten rule that unless you started as a mechanic or a bus operator, you can only go so far in operations leadership at the MTA. So I sort of hit a glass ceiling at the time, and I said to myself, well, what's next? I think I have more to give. And I didn't really know what to do at the time. I looked on the outside a little bit, looked on some of the job postings at the MTA. Ultimately, I decided to go back to school and get my master's of city and regional planning and a concentration in transportation. And quite frankly, my eyes opened, just going back to school. Up until then, I was under the impression that, public transit was all about pushing buses out the door by 9 a.m. and then pushing them back out by 4 p.m., right? And that was it. But when I went back to school, I realized there's a whole multi-billion-dollar industry that's behind, making that happen. And really opened my eyes, looked at the space a lot more comprehensively, holistically, and it opened up some doors for me at New York City Transit. The only thing I'd like to add there for some future leaders is that, during my career, while I was lucky enough to ascend to the top, it didn't all come easy, right? So, you gotta understand and know that there's going to be some ups and downs during that career, right? You're going to take some interviews. You're not going to get that job. You're going to think you're the most qualified. You're not going to be the most fulfilled in this current job. But what I would offer is that don't ever allow that to stop you, right? Go, have your vision, know where you want to go, and keep pushing, right? Whether that means going back to school, whether that means, maybe spending a couple extra hours, going into the bus depots of the world to learn operations on your own, whether that means to sort of seek out some informal or formal mentorship from folks that could help you, just go at it. What I found is, public transit really is, there's a world of opportunity, and it's very fulfilling if you make what you want to make out of it.
That's great. In my first book, Full Throttle, I've got a chapter called Don't Despise the Day of Small Beginnings, and talk about how that, if you are in a position where you feel like it's not utilizing your full capacity, look around and find what you can learn during that role, right? So if you are, to switch the analogies to, let's say you're in the belly of a big coal burning ship, at sea in the 1800s, right? And you're there shoveling coal in there and you're like, crap, man, I hate this job. I want to be the captain. Well, learn everything you can about how the engine works. And then when right, isn't that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was a time in my career where I was, the title was General Superintendent of Support Services, which really was the administrative manager for the bus depot. But what I would tell you is, I probably spent more time on the shop floor talking to mechanics, the dispatchers and the bus operators. In other words, while I was responsible for administration, I made sure that I spanned my scope, because I knew I didn't want to just do the administrative part for the rest of my career.
Yes.
So I took that opportunity to learn the operations, and I think that's what you're saying, Paul.
Yeah, it's funny. Andy Byford, who were you there when he was there?
Yes, he was my boss and a mentor of mine for sure.
Yeah, great guy. And I've got to know him over the last probably like 10 years. He was head of Toronto when I was head of Baltimore. And so I went up to his office and we talked, and we spoke at APTA conferences, et cetera. And I've interviewed him a couple times. And Craig, it's interesting that his career, he really curated it, which I thought was different than what I did. And I'm sure he told you this, but he chose, okay, I'm going to go in safety for a while. Now I'm going to go in operations for a while. Now I'm going to go in this for a while. Whereas, my career's been more like, swimming down a river and going where the current takes me. And so I think that talks to, though, what you're talking about. In each opportunity I've had, I've tried to learn more so that it prepared me for the next thing. But he had more of a definite plan to know that, I'm not going to spend 30 years in bus maintenance or in bus safety or in bus operations or in engineering. I'm going to move around. If I want the top job, I need to understand how this whole thing runs. Would you agree with that approach?
Absolutely. I don't know if it's unfortunate, but I didn't take that same approach as Andy, which, in looking back, probably putting together that game plan, would probably have been helpful. But, I was the benefactor of a management training program that most people, the overwhelming majority of people, are not. So I'm really very lucky in that regards. The program back in 1992 that I went in was called the Future Managers Program. And part of the setup of that program was a 2-year program, was rotating job assignments. And I think that's what you're getting at. While Andy, did it on his own, he went into the safety department and the safety department. This gave me the opportunity for a 3-month stint to work in many of the different departments within New York City Transit, specifically buses. And what that really did for me when I graduated from their program is 2 things. Number one is I got exposure to many of the people there. So they knew me, I knew them. And, as you know, Paul, this is a people business. So the more people,
it's all about relationships, baby.
Exactly. The more people and you know who to pick up the phone, the better help you can. And then the other thing was it allowed me to connect the dots, right? So if you're always in your own silo, it's hard to connect the dots. How does the capital planning people fit into, pushing the buses out the door, or the safety or anybody else? But working alongside them, I was able to connect those dots better and help me down the road as I became, more of a mid and upper level leadership in the organization.
We're nearing the end of the interview, but a couple more questions I wanted to ask you. The week this airs, I'll be in Nashville at our Think Transit conference, and I'll be hosting a bunch of CEO panels. One of them is with 8 brand new CEOs with under a year under their belt. And I want to ask you to tell them and other new CEOs, give us some input and some advice as they are struggling with, the tough fiscal decisions that are happening, their own career development and succession planning programs.
Sure. So what I would say is that in regard to these tough fiscal decisions that we're in, especially post-pandemic, I've seen budget crises for 33 years of my 33 years in New York City Transit.
Yeah.
I know this one's a little bit different. I get that because, again, I'm just coming out of the agency. And in those 33 years of these budget crises, what we always tend to do, because of the urgency of the time, is prioritize, rightfully so, state of good repair and service, right? You have to do that. But what we can't continue to do, which we've done, is keep cutting these needed people programs, right? The workforce development, the succession planning. I think we all found ourselves in a position here in our industry where, there was a dearth of future leaders, quite frankly, right? Because we haven't been investing in the people the same way we're investing in the infrastructure. So what I would say is, as best we can, continue to invest in our people. Again, we've said it earlier in the conversation. We're in a people business, right? We move people. We don't move freight or cargo. We move our customers or people. And the people that make it happen are our most valued resource. We got to continue to invest in our people amidst these other crises that we need to solve for.
I think that's great advice. In the end, that's who's running the service, is the people, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can't, I found when I was leading, both the bus and then acting in New York City Transit, every single time I made it out of my ivory tower and got onto the shop floor or rode in the subway car and was speaking to those frontline employees, was the best time of my career, the best times of my days, I should say.
Yes,
the best days was when I was talking to the people that are making it happen day in and day out. Not only are they just so happy to see you out there, but they provide you a wealth of information that is, useful in your decision making.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. I just taught a class to CEOs at the Southwest Transit Association a couple months ago, and I was asking some of my CEO friends, because it was going to be a class on top 10 traits of CEOs, and I asked some friends of mine who are CEOs now, do you have any input you want to give? And Noah Berger suggested up from near Boston, he said, yeah, get on the bus, get on the train, get out of your office, and just what you said, Craig. Great way to end today's show is an admonition to leaders in transit to ride the services that you're in charge of. You'll learn so much. Craig, we could have talked for another hour. You got some great experience. I'll have to invite you to write a chapter in my remake of Full Throttle. I'm sure you've got some great stories to tell.
Sounds great, Paul. I would love to.
Thanks for being our guest today on Transit Unplugged, and thanks for the service that you've given to our industry over the last 30 some years and continue to give in your new role.
Thank you for having me. Had a lot of fun.
Hi, I'm Alea Curie, a communications consultant who loves working with public transit agencies. Let's talk for a minute about the importance of brand and how communicating a clear brand identity can make a difference for your transit agency. Brands are about safety. I don't mean safety in the sense that we use it in public transit, though that kind of safety can support your brand. What I mean is that brands make the public believe they already know how using your brand will make them feel, and that makes your brand a safe choice when users have other options. Communicating your brand involves a couple of different elements. The first is a clear visual identity that is displayed on vehicles, facilities, and throughout your communications universe, from your social media to letterhead. A clear visual identity includes graphic design that communicates what your service does and ties it to the region and user base. For example, the Verdi Shuttle provides service from the leafy town of Cottonwood, Arizona, to the high desert of Sedona, and its graphic design displays a shift from green to red. Maybe you remember Paul's interview with Noah Berger a few weeks ago. Noah works with the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority, now branded as MEVA. Their new visual identity weaves in both natural and industrial elements from their region, including rivers and clock towers. The language you use to communicate your brand is just as important as how your brand looks. Friendly language can make your customers feel closer to your brand. More authoritative or straightforward diction could make your audiences feel more secure. How you choose to speak to your audiences requires that you know them and understand their needs. This might mean you need to conduct regular audience surveys or focus groups. Finally, while communicating a consistent brand identity is very important, delivering a false promise will ruin your brand for years to come. If you're promoting your transit brand as safe, clean, efficient, and reliable, can you stand behind those brand promises on the service side? And are you ready for reform if you can't? If you'd like to talk more about communicating brand identity or anything else related to communications in public transit, look me up on LinkedIn. My first name is spelled E-L-E-A, last name C-A-R-E-Y.
Hey, this is Paul Comfort. Thanks for sticking with us today on the Transit Unplugged podcast, the world's leading transit executive podcast, heard now in 130 countries around the world. Also, hopefully you're enjoying watching our Transit Unplugged TV show. We had close to 20,000 views now on our most recent episode, going viral for our industry, I'd say. And it's an episode that covers my recent visit to Singapore. It's on YouTube. Just type in Transit Unplugged TV. Take a watch and let us know what you think about it. On the podcast this year, we are focusing on leadership development. We've had some great leaders on talking about leadership development, including folks like Stephen M.R. Covey. It's been a great focus, and I've heard from many of you that you're really enjoying it. We plan to keep it going all year long. Lately, we've been having some transit leaders and leadership development folks who focus on one specific aspect of leadership. I'm going to shift now and actually do some book reviews. I'm going to have some folks who are in my orbit talk about some of the greatest leadership books they've read lately and lessons they learned. Maybe it'll help you build a reading list. So I'm going to do that today, but I'm actually going to read to you from my book, the first book, Full Throttle, Living Life to the Max with No Regrets. I wrote this shortly after I finished up my time at the MTA in Baltimore as CEO. And I had many lessons I'd learned over 30 years in the public transit industry, and I wanted to share them with folks. I had been doing so. I'd been writing articles for magazines and actually doing leadership development courses and classes for our employees and for others who asked me to come in and speak at their organization, which I continue to do. And I'm happy to do that for your group, by the way. If you've got a group of leaders together in your transit agency or company, and you'd like me to come in, no charge, I'd be happy to drop into a staff meeting for 20 minutes one day and give some talks on leadership and lessons I've learned in my career and what's happening now with transit trends, anything like that. Just let me know. Drop me a line at paul.comfort@modaxo.com. So Full Throttle was 21 life lessons that I'd learned in my effort to give it my all, full throttle. I also invited 9 other CEOs to give their takes on things they had learned over the years. One big lesson. It's a great book. I really think that you'd enjoy it if you get a chance to look at it. So today I'm going to read to you from chapter 16 from the book. And it is putting people first, which is my principle. And at the end of the chapter, I give you my formula for leadership development. And I think if you talk to folks I've worked with over the years, most of them would tell you that it was very effective and they really enjoyed leading in this environment that it created. Chapter 16, page 85 from Full Throttle. Put people first. Hitting on all 8 cylinders is a phrase I often use to describe a moment when all the team members are using their full abilities. They feel great about coming to work every day and are accomplishing the goals set out for them individually and as a group. I believe it normally takes about a year or more to go through the 4 stages of organizational development, which are form, storm, norm, and perform, to get your team to this important phase. If possible, I like to bring a few members with me from my previous leadership team to my new employer's team. Metaphorically speaking, they become a sort of leaven that can transfer the rising ingredients from the old to the new lump of dough from which we build our top-performing teams. I have seen that focusing on this type of team building as a top priority helps you meet your target profitability and performance goals faster and better than if you put your whole focus on cost control, loss prevention, and efficiency measures up front. Because in the end, it is these leaders who are helping you meet your target goals. So what's the difference between Kmart and Walmart? Both were started the same year in the same state and sell basically the same things. One, however, went on to become the biggest company in the early 2000s, and the other went bankrupt. I would argue that the difference was the management leadership team. When you as a leader empower a team of entrusted colleagues to take full responsibility with the accompanying authority over their departments, and you protect them from the slings and arrows from above, you create a winning dynamic that will allow them to build success for you and your agency or company. However, in most companies and government agencies, the politics of just trying to keep your job and career take precedence and often end up being the primary focus of your job. When that occurs, the cortisol hormones of fight or flight dominate the workplace, and everyone acts like a gazelle waiting for the lions to pounce. Heads are up, looking around for danger, worrying, and not focused on the task at hand. Unfortunately, there's way too much wasted time and effort expended in this state of distress throughout the vast bureaucracies of corporate, government, and quasi-government America. I dare you to be different. Here is my formula. Build a team. Work to earn their trust, and then protect them. Pick team leaders that demonstrate 3 primary skill sets: competence, dedication, and loyalty. Share information with them and give them real authority over their responsibilities. Agree with them on the goals they are shooting for and the boundaries they must stay within, and then provide them the freedom to choose how to accomplish the mission using their own creativity, while holding them accountable for iterative improvement moving toward the end goal and producing results. Then watch them achieve. You will be remembered as one of the best bosses they ever had. I challenge you to put people first, and I believe profits will follow. That's it from chapter 16 of my book. Hopefully some of that spoke to you. If it did, let us know. And if you have a lesson that you've learned in leadership, or you have a great book that you've read recently that had some leadership lessons and you'd like to share it with our Transit Unplugged family, drop us a note at the email address that Tris gives you at the end of the show. We'd be happy to hear from you and consider your request. Thanks again for being with us each and every week on Transit Unplugged. If it's Wednesdays, it's Transit Unplugged.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transit Unplugged News and Views with our special guest, Craig Cipriano, National Director of Zero Emissions Mobility at STV. Coming up next week on Transit Unplugged In Depth, we have Andy Thompson, Managing Director of Go Ahead Singapore. Don't forget to visit transitunplugged.com, sign up for the newsletter. They're always in the loop with whatever's going on with the show. If you have a question, comment, or would like to be a guest on the show, feel free to email us at info@transitunplugged.com. So until next week, ride safe, ride happy.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Transit Unplugged, the podcast. How would you like to see behind-the-scenes footage of the agencies that Paul visits? Then be sure to check out the new Transit Unplugged TV on YouTube, where transit evangelist Paul Comfort dives into the culture, the food, and the transit of major cities around the world. You'll see the operations control centers, how maintenance shops work, and the latest innovations taking place at agencies around the globe as we work together to improve the lives of our transit riders and our communities. Be sure to subscribe to Transit Unplugged TV on YouTube or at transitunplugged.com.